Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Chong Alfares with the top reports from the global economy. In today's magazine, Crimean tourism suffers while uncertainty over its status lingers, and Moldova fears potential Russian invasion. First, the headlines. The European Central Bank is considering dramatic steps to guard against dangerously low inflation. As the bank casts off its traditionally cautious approach, it may set negative interest rates, charging commercial banks for storing cash. Top policymakers also suggest that the central bank may purchase government or private sector debt to depress long-term rates and spur lending. ECB President Mario Draghi said in a speech in Paris, "We will do what is needed to maintain price stability." The ECB meets next on April 3rd. Britain will sell a further 7.5% stake in Lloyds Banking Group worth about $6.9 billion via a placing to institutional investors. The sale trims the government's stake in Lloyds to 25%. The government's initial sale of a 6% stake in September was seen as a milestone in Britain's recovery from the 2008 financial crisis. Taxpayers pumped a combined $109 billion into Lloyds and the Royal Bank of Scotland. UK Financial Investments is expected to sell more shares later in the year in an offer which will include private retail investors. Facebook made its second blockbuster acquisition of the year, acquiring Oculus VR for $2 billion in cash and stock. Oculus is the first billion-dollar company to emerge from the Kickstarter crowdfunding platform. Facebook creator Mark Zuckerberg said he's buying the 20-month-old maker of virtual reality goggles to make it a platform for many other experiences. Though Zuckerberg said Oculus could become the most social platform ever, it isn't yet available to customers. And Oculus is still in the process of resolving motion sickness issues stemming from the use of virtual reality technology. Though it may take Oculus several years to create really compelling virtual reality experiences, pairing with Facebook may give Oculus the deep pockets it needs to succeed. Chinese President Xi Jinping began a state visit to France, marking 50 years of Sino-French diplomatic relations. Trade deals are at the heart of the visit, as French investment in China still far outweighs Chinese investment in France. Though China is the 8th largest foreign investor in France, Chinese investment represents a mere 4% of total foreign investment in the country. In 2013, France registered a trade deficit of 26 billion euros with China. But French ambassador to China, Sylvie Berman, said Xi's visit to France will open new dialogues and promised there will be a good harvest. Airbus and China's Aviation Industry Corporation may jointly produce 1,000 EC-175 helicopters over the next 20 years in France and China. The deal is set to be announced during the state visit of China's President Xi Jinping. The deal would total $8 billion and ensure the future of EC-175, the latest model of Airbus helicopters. The Ukrainian economy will most likely contract by 3% in 2014, in contrast with earlier growth projections. The former administration had forecast the economy would grow by 3% in 2014, following zero growth in 2013. Kiev is negotiating a loan of $15 to $20 billion with the International Monetary Fund. The Ukrainian economy has been severely weakened by months of political turmoil and mismanagement, and is further strained by the standoff between Russia and the West. Over now to the Crimean Peninsula, where the tourist industry fears for its future as Ukraine and Russia wrangle over its status. But the prospects could be brighter for the agricultural sector after Moscow pledged at least $1 billion to buoy the economy. The following report has more.
Spring arrives on the southern coast of Crimea. Long popular with tourists, the region's beaches, warm climate and historic towns mean the area is dubbed the Ukrainian Riviera, a name that might now have to change after the peninsula chose to join Russia in Sunday's referendum. But for now, those in the Crimean tourism industry are simply afraid for the future.
Lots of tour companies have cancelled their trips to Crimea, to Yalta, to Ukraine in general, because of the ongoing conflict.
In past years, around 60% of tourists have been Ukrainian. The fear is that number will now drop, although some Ukrainian tourists insist the loss of Crimea won't spoil their holiday plans.
Yes, whatever happens, I will always want to come here. I love Crimea.
Crimea's authorities know how important tourism is to the peninsula. The first tweet by the interim Prime Minister the day after the referendum urged everyone to visit Crimea this summer.
This year, we want to make Crimea, with the help of Russia, a tourist mecca. I'm sure we can create the conditions to attract Western tourists.
Agriculture is also one of the region's biggest earners. Crimean wine and so-called champagne are famous across the former Soviet Union. Even French actor Gérard Depardieu reportedly owns some of the 25,000 hectares of vineyards. Winemakers here are optimistic a Russian future will be good news for them.
The Russian market is a lot bigger, richer, and is developing faster than the Ukrainian one. That's a fact.
But neither business nor tourism are likely to flourish until peace and stability in Crimea are restored. For now, everything is uncertain, and most cannot even contemplate looking beyond the current unrest.
And we stay in Eastern Europe, where Crimea's annexation by Russia inspires fear in other states that find themselves stuck between Russia and the European Union. Here's Daniel Roth with more.
As Europe and the world acclimate to the absorption of Crimea into Russia, the Moldovan president and others have expressed fears that Moldova could be next. Much of the anxiety surrounds the sentiments of the pro-Russian region of Transnistria, where about 30% of the population considers themselves ethnically Russian, and some are vocally supportive of Russian absorption.
Since it was created, Transnistria has hoped to become part of Russia, as there are more Russians there. So it's nothing new for us. Of course, the events in Crimea stir things up a bit.
Moldova, sitting in between Romania and Ukraine, is among Europe's poorest countries, depending mostly on agricultural exports and money coming in from citizens that work abroad.
Pensions are minuscule and are not enough. Such unrest just causes even more damage.
The overarching numbers are positive, though. National poverty fell from over 30% to under 17%, and extreme poverty from 4.5% to 0.6% between 2006 and 2012. As well, GDP growth has surpassed 5% over 2010 to 2013. Nevertheless, Moldova, similar to Ukraine, is finding itself stuck between pursuing closer ties with the European Union and maintaining traditional economic ties with Russia.
I hope Moldova will become part of the European Union. We hope it will allow us to have a better retirement and a more respectable life.
The current pro-EU coalition in power is aiming to sign an association agreement in the summer, but present apprehensions about Russian reprisals, whether economic or political, are not without reason.
Sorry. Yeah. And now for a look at a different bit of stories collected for you from around the world in Media Watch with Daniel Roth. So Daniel,
how's it going?
Looking dapper today.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's the color.
It is the color, yeah. So I understand that we were talking about PIKETTY.
Yeah, Thomas Piketty,
Yes.
Paul Krugman, New York Times columnist, Nobel laureate economist, big guy on campus, wrote about him this week. Thomas Piketty, who's a French economist, who's been making big waves with a book that Krugman is saying is at least the book of the year, if not the book of the decade. And it's called Capital in the 21st Century.
And if I may say so myself, if I'm not mistaken, we actually talked about Piketty a couple of months ago.
Yeah, we did. We
were first.
We called it around New Year's, and Krugman is kind of maybe he's watching our show, and he understood how important this is. What he says is Capital in the 21st Century is the magnum opus of the French economist Thomas Piketty, and he actually we drew out an important quote here about Piketty from Krugman. That so he says we can get this quote up.
Yeah, we have it up.
That Piketty makes the case that we're on our way back to patrimonial capitalism, in which the commanding heights of the economy are dominated not just by wealth, but also by inherited wealth. So that's really, so this guy Piketty really, he's the guy who coined this idea of the 99% versus the 1%. He started talking about not only the 1%, but the 1% of the 1%.
Right. Now, is this really something new, though? I mean, essentially, I tend to believe that things never really change. They just, you know, the more they change, the more they stay the same. I mean, we've always kind of dealt with an oligarchy or, you know, a king or whatever it may be.
Yeah, so Piketty would agree with this. What he's looking at is long-term historical economic data in order to understand long-term data into the future, sort of predict what's going on. And what he's seeing is that the people with capital wealth are gaining more wealth at a speed of about 3 or 4 times the speed of the rest of the economy.
Wealth is exponential.
Right. So when if you have capital to create more wealth, you're getting much, much richer than if you simply have labor to sell. If you're just a worker, someone who's, you know, accumulating wealth based on your day job or few jobs, as the case is these days in a lot of places. Right,
which is also, just, you know, I have to sidetrack you for a second, because there was a very interesting article that came out also regarding a book that was written by an author from The Economist who focused on the importance of genetics in determining your wealth. And there was basically this whole study done on different families, different family names that came up over the course of like several hundred years, where the same name came up, just indicating essentially that the same family, you know, essentially held on to a certain amount of wealth. I'm not just talking about the Rothschilds, you know, I'm talking about various families across the world. Yeah. It's interesting. But then, you know, it's logical also that wealth creates more wealth, isn't it? I mean,
certainly in this system, and what Piketty is citing here is an issue that has to do with deregulation of taxes, sort of deregulation of progressive tax systems that allow for inherited wealth to be passed on. Right. So he would say it's not exactly genetic, but it has to do with regulations and tax systems. Why don't we take a moment now and listen to our interview where we called it before Krugman. You know, we really had the scoop on this, and let's take a look.
With Eitan Avriel, yeah?
Yeah, with Eitan Avriel, the editor-in-chief of The Marker.
Fantastic. Let's see.
He, at the age of 22, had already a PhD and got a job at MIT, and then after a few years came back to France. And then in the last 15 years, he's the guy that researched the difference of income between the rich people, the middle income people, and the poor people. So when everybody knows about the 99% and the 1%, the guy who actually found these numbers, and at the end of the day, because of him, this whole concept exists, is Thomas Piketty. Now he has been doing that for quite a while now. But this year, just a few months ago, he published a book, 900 pages. The name of the book is Capitalism in the 21st Century, and it brings 2 big ideas, in my opinion. One is that everybody should talk about the really big questions, and not all the small ones and the tactics and how to survive in a certain crisis. And the big questions are 2. One is what happens if the interest rate on assets is much higher than growth. What happens then is that the rich people are getting, by definition, much richer because they get more and more money on their capital, and it goes through inheritance. And if you take that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, you find yourself in a situation that seems for a democracy that is unsustainable. At the end of the day, most of the assets, most of the wealth, most of the income is going to end up in the 10% or the 5% or 1% richest people, and he's the one who's bringing it back to the public discourse.
Interesting stuff.
So what Avriel's really laying down here is that Piketty is... what he's saying is that there's a few reasons. One is deregulation of inheritance taxes and kind of the allowing for money to pass from generation to generation has allowed for things that Krugman cites, that 6 of the 10 wealthiest Americans have inherited their wealth.
Right.
And it's not quite there yet. The 1% these days has really been fueled by bonuses and huge CEO salaries. But what we're seeing here, what Capital in the 21st Century is saying, what Krugman's citing, is that we're watching the regrowth, as you said, the regrowth of something that we've seen in the past, which is gross inequality, an end to the middle class. And so that's really what we're seeing here. And
so what's the solution to this?
Well, the solution, according to Piketty, is to re-regulate and create a system where taxes are taken in and wealth is distributed more evenly, which he says was a huge theme in the 19th century, led to more even distribution in the 20th century, that has been dismantled and is being dismantled now.
Okay. Great. Well, I guess on those last notes, thank you very much for your wise words about Mr. Piketty, a person that I'm sure we will hear more about. That takes us to the end of this edition. Thank you very much for watching us. Do join us again tomorrow and send us your thoughts.